The smell of gingerbread and pine has always meant Christmas to me. For 30 years, it meant my wife Dorothy standing at the counter rolling out dough, flour dusting her apron like snow. It meant my son Robert, barely tall enough to reach the table, sneaking spoonfuls of frosting when he thought I wasn't looking. It meant a house that hummed with warmth even when the wind outside was bitter enough to crack skin. But this Christmas Eve, as I pulled into the driveway of my son's new house, the smell drifting from the chimney didn't feel like home. It felt like walking into a room where everyone already knows something you don't. I sat in my truck a moment longer than I needed to, my hands still on the wheel. Something in my gut told me this evening wasn't going to go the way I hoped. I just didn't know yet how bad it would get. Being a father is a strange thing. You spend 3 decades building something: patience, values, the difference between right and wrong, and handing it to your child piece by piece, hoping they'll carry it forward. You hope they remember the lessons instead of the hardships. You hope they'll grow up and still see you the way they did when they were small, when you were the tallest, strongest, safest person in the world. But sometimes life rearranges the furniture in your child's heart, and you walk back into a house you built and find you're the one who doesn't fit anymore. That's exactly how I felt standing outside Robert's front door. I straightened my old wool coat, the same one I'd worn to Dorothy's funeral 4 winters back. It had a small tear near the pocket I'd stitched myself with fishing line because I didn't know how to sew properly, and it showed. But it was clean. I'd hung it up the night before so the wrinkles would fall out. I didn't want to give anyone a reason to look twice. Not that it would matter. Some people decide what they see in you before you ever open your mouth. The door opened before I could knock, and there was Robert, my only son. He looked exhausted in a way I hadn't seen since he was studying for his engineering exams 20 years ago. There was a stiffness in the way he held his shoulders, like a man bracing for weather. He smiled, but it didn't sit right on his face. "Dad?" he said, a little too brightly. "You made it. Come on in, it's freezing." I stepped inside, and the scent of pine and gingerbread was quickly swallowed by something heavier: expensive candles, the kind that smell like a department store rather than a kitchen. The house was staged like a magazine spread. Marble countertops, a fireplace that looked like it had never actually burned wood, a Christmas tree so perfectly decorated it looked like it belonged behind velvet rope. It was a different world from my little house on Larkspur Lane, with its worn recliner and the record player Dorothy and I danced to on our anniversary every year. I felt out of place immediately, the way you feel walking into a store you know you can't afford anything in. "Let me grab your coat," Robert said, though he didn't quite reach for it. I unzipped it myself, fingers stiff from the cold, and handed it over. I saw him notice the stitched tear near the pocket. Something flickered across his face. I couldn't tell if it was embarrassment or pity, but neither one felt good. Before he could hang it up, a voice sliced through the air from the living room, sharp as a broken bottle. "Robert, is that your father?" I was beginning to wonder if he'd gotten lost driving in from wherever it is he lives now. My stomach dropped. That voice belonged to Diane, my daughter-in-law's father's second wife, a woman I'd met exactly twice before, both times at events where she made sure everyone knew whose money had paid for the catering. She was sitting on the good sofa, legs crossed, a crystal glass of red wine balanced in one hand like a scepter. She didn't stand. 7. She just looked me over the way you'd look over a used car you had no intention of buying. I forced a smile, the same one I'd been forcing my whole life at moments like this. "Evening, ma'am. Merry Christmas. Thank you for having me." "Oh, we didn't exactly choose to have you," she said, swirling her glass. "Robert insisted. Said something about family being family." I told him, family is what you make it, but he's sentimental like that. My daughter-in-law, Christine, came around the corner from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was polished in a way that made you feel underdressed just looking at her, every hair in place, nails done, a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my truck payment. When Robert first brought her home, I liked her. She laughed easily, asked about my work, seemed genuinely fond of him, but somewhere over the years, something had shifted. I'd started noticing the way she'd correct him at dinner parties, the way she'd wince slightly when he mentioned where he grew up. "Mother, please," Christine said, but there was no real correction in it. It was the kind of gentle scolding you'd give someone for telling a slightly off-color joke, not for insulting a guest in his own son's home. I'm simply being honest, Diane said. Is that a crime now? I scanned the room, hoping to catch sight of the only person in that house who still looked at me the way I remembered being looked at my granddaughter, Maddie. She wasn't there. Probably upstairs or in the backyard chasing the neighbor's dog like she always did. Robert guided me toward the living room, his hand hovering near my back without ever quite touching it, like he was afraid of catching something. Sit anywhere, Dad, he said. Dinner's almost ready. I chose the wooden rocking chair in the corner, far from the cream-colored sectional. I didn't want to risk leaving a mark on something that expensive. Diane's eyes traveled down to my boots, old work boots, resoled twice, but sturdy. You know, William, she said, using my first name like it left a bad taste in her mouth. My late husband always said, if you can't dress the part, you shouldn't show up to the party. He was in commercial real estate, understood the importance of appearances. End quote. Heat crawled up my neck, but I kept my voice even. I'm retired now, ma'am. Spent 35 years as a fire captain. We didn't dress up much on the job, just turnout gear and boots that could survive a burning building. I thought I cleaned up all right for tonight, though. Bless your heart, she said, that particular phrase dripping, with a sweetness that meant the exact opposite. I'm sure you did your best. Pasta. I glanced at Robert, needing him to say something, anything. But he was staring down at his phone in the corner, thumb scrolling at nothing, present in body only. He'd checked out the moment the first insult landed, which told me this wasn't the first time he'd let it happen. The conversation drifted to their upcoming cruise to the Mediterranean, the renovation on their kitchen, the private academy Maddie had just been accepted into. I sat quietly, shrinking a little more with every sentence. A stranger at my own son's Christmas. Christine finally called everyone to the dining room, and I felt something in my chest loosen. A change of scenery, at least. I followed behind the group, past the smell of their candles and into a dining room that looked like it belonged in a furniture catalog, a long table set with china that had probably never touched a dishwasher, gold-rimmed glasses, a centerpiece of white roses and pine that must have cost more than my monthly heating bill. And there, at the far end of the table, swinging her legs because her feet didn't reach the floor, was Maddie. 7 years old, dressed in a stiff velvet dress she clearly hated, based on the way she kept tugging at the collar. The moment she spotted me, her whole face lit up like someone had flipped a switch. "Grandpa," she shouted, waving both arms. "You're here! You're here!" My chest ached with warmth for the first time all evening. "Hey there, Peanut," I said, letting a real smile break through for the first time. "There's my favorite girl in the whole world." Diane immediately hushed her. "Madison," indoor voice, "and sit up straight, you're slouching." The seating arrangement, I quickly realized, had been decided with military precision. Christine at the head, Robert at the foot, Diane on one side with Christine's half-brother, a heavyset man in a blazer who kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be on the other. There were open seats near the middle. I was directed, politely but firmly, to the far end. "You don't mind being down there, do you, William?" Christine asked, her tone sugar-sweet. "We like to keep the center for immediate family. So many people to fit in this year. If 50A, NPA, immediate family. I was the father of the man who'd built that house with his own 2 hands, the man who paid the mortgage, and somehow, I wasn't immediate family." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and nodded. "Of course, wherever's fine." Gate. I sat down, and to my surprise, Maddie scrambled out of her assigned seat and plopped down right beside me. Diane's face twitched with visible irritation. "Madison, honey, come sit by Grandma Diane," she cooed, patting the seat beside her. "No, I want to sit with Grandpa," Maddie said, crossing her arms. "He tells the best stories. He used to run into burning houses and save people." Diane's mouth curled. "He put out fires, sweetheart. There's a difference between that and actually accomplishing something with your life." The comment landed like a slap of its own. I wasn't a doctor or a lawyer, no framed degrees on my wall, but for 35 years I'd run into buildings other people were running out of. I'd carried children down ladders, pulled men from wreckage, stood at more funerals for fallen brothers than I could count on both hands. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it had cost me more than these people would ever understand. Apparently none of that counted at this table. Dinner was served a roast, potatoes, green beans, the works, and it smelled wonderful, but I could barely taste any of it. The air in that room was so cold it could have frosted the windows. Diane held court through most of it, talking about her country club, her latest charity gala, how impossible it was these days to find a decent housekeeper. Every sentence seemed aimed like a dart in my direction. I have to say, William, she said, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, I'm surprised they let you sit with us tonight. Usually we have the staff eat separately in the kitchen. She laughed, a brittle little sound. I'm only teasing, of course. Though that coat really is something. Where on earth did you find it? A church rummage sale, I said quietly. $2. The table went dead silent. Every eye turned to me, waiting to see how I'd react. My hands were trembling under the table. Out of sight, Robert finally spoke, though it wasn't much of a rescue. Diane, come on. Let's just enjoy dinner. But she wasn't finished. She had the scent of blood in the water now. I'm only curious, Robert. I'd love to know, William. What's it actually like, living on so little? It must be freeing, in a way. No expectations, no responsibilities to anyone. Every pair of eyes in that room settled on me. Christine studied her wine glass like it held the answers to a test. Her brother smirked openly. And Robert, my son, stared down at his plate, cutting his roast into smaller and smaller pieces, refusing to look up. I took a slow breath. I wouldn't call it freeing, ma'am. It's a lot of hard years, but I raised a good son. I put him through college on a firefighter's salary. I paid off my house free and clear. I've got nothing to be ashamed of. Oh, you own your house? Diane's eyebrows shot up in mock astonishment. I assumed you were renting somewhere. How resourceful. She laughed again, sharper this time. Something in my chest was building, hot and heavy, but I kept it locked down. It wasn't even her cruelty that hurt worst. I dealt with plenty of hard people in my life. It was watching my son sit there and let it happen in his own house, under his own roof, without a single word in my defense. I turned to Maddie instead, needing an escape from the wreckage of that table. So, Peanut, you like the potatoes? She leaned toward me and whispered, I like the rolls better. Can I just eat rolls for dinner? I laughed, the first real laugh I'd managed all night. You know, when your daddy was your age, he tried that trick too. Told him if he only ate bread for dinner, his stomach would turn into a loaf. Her eyes went wide with delight. I'm only teasing, sweetheart, but save room. I hear there's pie. She grinned and nodded, and for a moment the whole ugly room faded a little. Then Maddie started squirming in her seat, tugging at the lace collar of her dress. Mommy, this is itchy, she whined. Grandpa, can you help? You used to wear a uniform. You know how collars work. Christine glanced up sharply. Madison, leave your collar alone, you look lovely. But it's scratching my neck, she said, tugging harder, her face screwing up dramatically. Diane shot me a look, as if I'd somehow orchestrated the whole thing. Can you not keep your granddaughter under control? We are trying to have a civilized dinner. I looked to Robert, hoping for even a flicker of the boy I remembered, the one who used to run to me anytime something felt unfair. He just kept staring at his plate, a ghost in his own dining room. I'll help her, I said, already rising. It's no trouble at all. Dad, just let her be, Robert mumbled without lifting his eyes. She's fine. I've got it, I said, and walked around the table to kneel beside her chair. I loosened the tight lace at her collar, just enough to give her room to breathe. I used to help firefighters half my age get their gear right before a call. A little girl's dress collar was nothing. There you go, Peanut. Better? Thanks, Grandpa, she beamed. As I stood to walk back to my seat, Diane cleared her throat loud enough to stop me mid-step. Oh, William, while you're up, why don't you clear a few of these plates? I imagine you're used to that kind of work. That was the final straw. It wasn't even cruel in a clever way. It was just plain, deliberate humiliation, meant to put me in my place as the help in a house my own son owned. I turned to face her fully. The sender, and he. Wester. No, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I won't be doing that. I'm a guest here tonight. My son invited me. I'll sit down and finish my meal like everybody else. You could have heard a pin drop on that hardwood floor. Diane's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. She clearly wasn't accustomed to anyone telling her no. "Excuse me?" she said, rising from her chair so fast it screeched against the floor. "You want to play guest in this house?" Before I even registered what was happening, she crossed the room, drew back her hand, and struck me across the face. Hard. The sound cracked through the dining room like a gunshot. My head snapped sideways. I tasted copper in my mouth. For a moment I just sat there, stunned, my cheek burning, staring at the tablecloth. "That's for your attitude," she spat, standing over me, her voice shaking with fury. "This is my daughter's house, and you walk in here in some thrift store coat acting like you belong at this table. You don't. People like you belong outside, not sitting here pretending you're one of us." I looked up at my son. My vision swam slightly. "Robert," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "are you going to say something? Anything?" Robert's face had gone white as chalk. His hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles blanched. For one brief second, I thought I saw the boy I raised flash across his features, the boy who once punched a kid twice his size for pushing his little cousin off a swing. Then it vanished. He looked at Diane. He looked at Christine, who was shaking her head at him, almost imperceptibly. A silent warning. He opened his mouth, and I waited, praying. "Dad," he said finally, his voice thin and defeated. Just apologize, please. Say sorry and we can move past this and finish dinner." Said. Something inside me cracked wide open. It wasn't the slap that broke me. It was my own son, my flesh and blood, watching a woman strike his father across the face and asking me to apologize. Apologize? My voice cracked on the word. "She hit me, Robert, in front of your daughter." "I know," he said, eyes on the floor. "But you provoked her, Dad. You know how she gets. Just say sorry, and we'll move on." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked around the table. Christine was folding her napkin with exaggerated care, refusing to meet my eyes. End quote. I ass. Her brother sat back in his chair with a faint smirk, clearly entertained by the show. And Diane stood there, arms crossed, chin lifted, victorious. "Well?" she demanded. "Are you going to apologize? Or should I call someone to have you removed from this property?" I had nowhere to go, no way to fight back that wouldn't make things worse. I couldn't strike a woman. I couldn't say the things boiling in my chest, with my granddaughter sitting right there. I opened my mouth, searching for words that wouldn't come. That's when a small voice sliced through the tension like a blade through silence. "Mommy." It was Maddie. She'd slipped out of her chair and was standing just a few feet from me, her small hands wrapped tightly around her mother's old cell phone, the one Christine had handed down to her for games in the car. Her face was lit faintly by the screen. "Mommy," she said again, louder this time, her voice trembling but determined. Christine turned, startled. "Maddie, sweetie, go sit down. This is grown-up stuff." "But Mommy." Her voice rose, cracking with nerves. "Something happened." "We'll talk later, baby," Christine said, reaching toward her. "No." Maddie's shout rang through the dining room, and everyone froze. Her eyes were wide, glassy with tears, but her voice didn't waver. "Listen, I was recording. On your Life 360 app, Mommy. It shows videos to everybody in the family group. Aunt Karen's on it. Uncle Pete's on it. Grandma Susan's on it too." The color drained from every face at that table. Diane's expression shifted from fury to something closer to panic. "What are you talking about?" Christine's voice climbed an octave. "Turn that off right now." But Maddie wasn't looking at her mother anymore. She was looking at me, her grandfather, the man who'd just been humiliated worse than she'd ever seen an adult treated. Then she turned to face the phone screen directly, her small chin lifting with a bravery that didn't belong to a 7-year-old. "Grandma Diane," she said into the camera, tears sliding down her cheeks but her voice steady as stone. "Everybody can see this. Everybody in the family. Man." And a collective gasp swept the room. Diane lunged toward her, hand outstretched. "Give me that phone. You little... But Maddie darted around the table and pressed herself against my leg. The phone clutched to her chest. Diane stopped short, her face twisting into something between rage and terror. She understood, in that instant, that every cruel word, every sneer, every strike of her hand had just been broadcast live to a family group chat full of people who had no idea the sweet, generous Diane they thought they knew was capable of any of it. The little red recording light blinked out. The stream had ended, but the damage was already done. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Somewhere in the kitchen, the oven timer beeped, forgotten, marking the seconds of silence, like a countdown to something none of us could take back. Christine finally broke it, her voice trembling with an anger I'd never once heard her direct at her own mother. Maddie, who all saw that. Maddie looked up at me first, then back at her mother. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and asked the question that would hang over that house for the rest of the night. Mommy, is it okay to hit people? The simplicity of it was devastating. Grandma Diane hit Grandpa, she said, her voice cracking wide open now, tears falling freely. I saw it happen, and nobody stopped her. Nobody said anything. Nobody said anything. She was right. Every adult at that table had watched a defenseless old man get struck in his own son's home, and every single one of them had either laughed, looked away, or told him to apologize. They'd been caught, not by some hidden camera or a lucky coincidence, but by a 7-year-old who understood right from wrong better than the roomful of grown adults surrounding her. Robert finally lifted his head. Whatever mask of passive compliance he'd been wearing all evening had shattered completely. In its place was something raw, dawning, horrified realization. "Oh my God," he whispered, looking at me with tears welling in his eyes. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Christine looked like she might be sick. Diane pressed a hand over her mouth, her eyes darting frantically around the room like a cornered animal searching for an exit that didn't exist. But I wasn't paying attention to their panic anymore. My focus was entirely on Maddie. I knelt down in front of her, ignoring the ache in my knees, and placed both hands gently on her small shoulders. "Peanut," I said, my voice thick, "can I see the phone for a second?" She handed it to me, her little fingers cold. I looked at the screen. The family group thread was lit up with notifications, dozens of them, still coming in. Names I recognized. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends who'd been added to that group over the years for birthday reminders and holiday photos. All of them had just watched this unfold in real time. I looked over at Robert. He was crying openly now, his shoulders shaking. "Dad, please," he said. "We can fix this. I can call everyone, explain, say it was a misunderstanding. And I stood up slowly, feeling something settle inside me, not rage anymore, but a strange, quiet calm. I realized something. Standing here, I said, looking down at the phone one last time before handing it back to Maddie. This wasn't about revenge. Your daughter didn't do this to punish anybody. She did it because she couldn't stand watching someone she loves get hurt, and she didn't know any other way to make it stop." I turned to Diane, who was trembling now, her earlier bravado completely gone. "You said people like me belong outside," I told her, my voice low and even. "You might be right. I don't belong in a house where cruelty gets served alongside the turkey. But you know something? Watching people finally see who you really are, that's going to be the best gift I get this Christmas." I handed the phone back to Maddie and knelt down to her level one more time. "You did a brave thing tonight, Peanut. A braver thing than any of the grown-ups in this room managed to do. Don't ever let anybody tell you different." I turned to leave. Robert grabbed my arm before I reached the hallway. "Dad, please don't go. We can talk about this. I can make this right." I pulled my arm free, gently but firmly. You let her hit me, Robert, in front of your own daughter. You told me to say sorry for being assaulted in my own son's home. There's no fixing that tonight. Maybe not ever. You made a choice at that table, and it wasn't me. I looked at Christine last. Be sick. I welcomed you into this family with open arms, and you sat there and let your mother treat me like garbage, without saying a single word. I shook my head. "I hope it was worth it." I walked out through that sterile, magazine-perfect living room and out the front door into the cold December air. I pulled on my old rummage sale coat, the same one I'd been embarrassed to wear just hours before. Now it felt like something closer to armor. It reminded me exactly who I was, and that I'd survived one of the hardest nights of my life with my dignity still intact. Behind me, through the closed door, I could hear raised voices, Christine's shouting, Diane's shrill protests, and beneath it all, the muffled sound of Robert crying. The perfect Christmas dinner they'd spent weeks planning had come apart in less than an hour. In the days that followed, word spread through that family group faster than any of them could contain. Aunts and uncles, who'd sat quietly on the sidelines of family gossip for years, suddenly had plenty to say. Diane was quietly asked to step down from her position on the board of the charity gala she'd chaired for a decade. Nobody wanted their name associated with a woman caught on video striking an elderly man. Christine's employer, who happened to be a family friend included in that same group chat, had a very uncomfortable conversation with her about company values the following week. Robert called me every single day for the first month. Voicemails, texts, even a letter mailed the old-fashioned way. And he didn't try to explain himself anymore, didn't ask me to understand his silence. He just kept saying he was sorry, that he'd failed me, that he didn't know how to undo it. I didn't answer most of those calls. That some wounds need time before you can even look at them, let alone talk about them. But it was a letter from Maddie, 3 weeks later, that finally cracked something open in me. Childish handwriting, uneven and slanted, along with a crayon drawing of the two of us sitting together at a table sharing a slice of pie. She wrote that she missed me, that she was sorry dinner got ruined, that her mom had taken her phone away for 2 weeks, but she said she didn't regret it, not even a little. She was the only one in that entire house who understood exactly what had happened that night and exactly why it had to happen. The slap didn't leave much of a mark, not really, just a small bruise that faded within days. But it wasn't the slap that stayed with me, in the end. It was my granddaughter's voice, small and shaking and utterly fearless, cutting through a room full of adults who'd forgotten what courage even looked like. She gave me back something that Christmas dinner had nearly taken, not just my dignity but my faith that decency still gets passed down, even in families that seem to have lost their way. Sometimes it skips a generation entirely and lands exactly where it's needed most.